Joy in Mudville. "Play ball!" The long cry echoed through the park as Alexander Jones, plenipotentiary of the Interbeing League to the planet Toka, came through the bleacher entrance. Out on the field, the pitcher wound up in a furry whirl of arms and legs and let go. Somehow the batter managed to shift his toothpick, grip the bat, and make ready while the ball was streaking at him. There was a clean, crisp smack, and the ball disappeared. The batter selected a fresh toothpick, stuck it in his mouth, jammed his hands in his pockets, and started a leisurely stroll around the diamond. Alexander Jones was not watching this. He had heard the crack of the bat and seen the ball vanish, but following that there had been only a vague impression of something that roared by him and smashed into the bench above in a shower of splinters. As a former interstellar survey man, Alex was ex officio a reservist in the Solar Guard, and the promptness and decisiveness with which he hit the dirt now would have brought tears of fond pride to the eyes of his superior officers had they been there to see it. However, they were not, and after holding his position for several seconds, Alex lifted a cautious head. Nobody else was up to bat. It looked safe to rise. He dusted himself off while glancing over the field. It was spotted with small round forms, tubby, golden-furred, ursine-faced, the Hoka natives of the planet Toka. They were all in uniform, the outfit of long red underwear, short-sleeved shirts, loose abbreviated trousers, and peaked caps, which had been traditional for baseball since it was invented back on Earth. Even if most of the races throughout the known galaxy which now played the game were not even remotely human, they all wore some variation of the costume. Alexander Jones often wondered if his kind might not in the long run go down in history less as the originators of space travel and the present leaders of the Interbeing League than as the creators of baseball. Mighty Casey, the planet's star batter, had completed his home run, or home saunter, and returned to the benches. Lefty was warming up before he tried himself against the babe. Professor, the intellectual outfielder, was at his post, keeping one eye on the diamond while the other studied a biography of the legendary George Herman Ruth. Beyond the bleachers, the high tile roofs of Mixumaxu lifted into a sunny sky. The teddies were practicing. The day was warm, the lark on the wing, the snail on the thorn. Putsy, the manager of the team, trotted worriedly up to Alex. He had been called something like Wish-To before the craze reached his planet, but the Hokas, perhaps the most adaptable race in the universe, the most enthusiastic innovators, had taken over names, language, everything from their human idols, though of course they tended to be too literal-minded. "You all right?" he demanded. He had carefully cultivated hoarseness into his squeaky voice. "You didn't get a concussion or nothing?" "I don't think so," answered Alex a little shakily. "What happened?" It was just Mighty Casey," said Putsy. "We allus try a new pitcher out on him. Shows him he's got a work when he's up with the teddies." Yes," said Alex, mopping his brow. "He isn't going to hit any more this way, is he?" "He knocks that kind every time," said Putsy with pardonable smugness. "Every time?" retorted Alex maliciously. "Did you ever hear the original poem of Casey at the bat?" Putsy leaped forward, clapped a furry hand to Alex's mouth, and warned in a shaking whisper, "Don't never say that. Geez, boss, you don't know what the sound of that poem does to Casey. He ain't never got over that day in Mudville." Alex winced. He might have known it. The Hoka mind was about as sui generis as a mind can get. Quick, intelligent, eager, but so imaginative that it could hardly distinguish between fact and fiction, and rarely bothered. Remembering other facets of Hoka-assimilated Earth culture, the Wild West, the Space Patrol, Sherlock Holmes, the Spanish Main, La Légion étrangère, Alex might have known that the one who had adopted the role of Mighty Casey would get so hypnotized by it as to start believing the ballad had happened to him personally. "Never mind," he said. "I came over to get you. The Serenians just arrived at the spaceport, and their manager's due at my office in half an hour. I want you there to meet him." "Okay," said Putsy, sticking an enormous cigar into his mouth. Alex shuddered as he lit up. Tobacco grown on Toka gets strong enough to walk. They strolled out together, the pudgy little hoka barely reaching the waist of the lean young human. Alex's runabout was waiting. It swung them above the walled city toward the flashy new skyscraper of the League mission. Seen from above, the town was a curious blend of the ancient and the ultra-modern. As a technologically backward race, the Hokas were supposed to be introduced gradually to galactic civilization. Until they had developed so far, they were to be gently guarded from harming themselves or being harmed by any of the more advanced peoples. Alex, as League plenipotentiary, had the job of guide and guardian. It paid well and was quite a distinction, but he sometimes wondered if it wasn't making him old before his time. If the Hokas were just a little less individualistic and unpredictable. The runabout set itself down on a landing flange of the skyscraper, and Alex led the way inside. Ella, his native secretary, nodded at him from an electro-writer. There was a cigarette in her lipsticked mouth, but the effect of her tight blouse was somewhat spoiled for him by the fact that Hokas have twice the lactational equipment of humans. She was competent, but her last job had been with Mixumaxu's leading private eye. Entering the inner office with Putsy, Alex flopped into a chair and put his feet on the desk. "Sit down," he invited. "Now look, before the Serenian manager comes, I want to have a serious talk with you. It's about financing the team."
"We're doing okay,"
said Putsy, chewing on his cigar. "Yes," said Alex grimly, "I know all about that, your arrangement with these self-appointed outlaws in the so-called Sherwood Forest."
"It's fair enough,"
said Putsy.
"They all get free passes."
"Nevertheless," said Alex after gulping for air, "things have got to be put on a more regular basis. Earth headquarters likes the idea of you people playing ball. It's a good way to get you accustomed to meeting other races, but I'm responsible for your accounts. Now, I have a plan which is a little irregular, but I do have discretionary powers." He reached for some papers. "As you know, there are valuable uranium deposits on this planet which are being held in trust for your people. They're being robot mined, and the proceeds have been going into the General Planetary Development Fund. But there are enough other sources of income for that, so I've decided to divert the uranium mines to the Teddy's use. That will give you an income out of which to pay for necessities." He paused and frowned. "And that does not include toothpicks for Casey."
"But he's gotta have toothpicks," cried the manager, shocked. "How can he waggle a toothpick without—"
"He can buy his own," said Alex sternly. "Salaries are paid to the team, you know. The same goes for that bookworm outfielder of yours, Professor. Let him pay for his own books if he must read while he plays."
Okay, but we gotta have a liquor fund. The boys gotta have their snort."
Alex gave in on that. The fieriness of the Hoka distillation and the capacity of its creators were a galactic legend. "All right, sign here, Putsy. Under the law, native property has to be in native hands. So this gives you title to those mines with the right to receive income from them and dispose of it as you see fit. Sometime next week I'll show you how to keep books." The manager scrawled his name as Ella stuck her head in the door. She never would use the office enunciator.
"A monster to see you, Chief,"
she said in a loud whisper. "Ask him to wait a minute, will you?" said Alex. He turned to Putsy. "Now look, please be as polite as you can when the Serenian comes in. I don't want any trouble."
"What's the lowdown on them anyway?"
inquired Putsy.
"All I know is we play 'em here next month for the sector pennant."
Well, I don't know." Alex coughed. "Just between us, I don't like them much. It isn't their appearance, of course. I've been friends with weirder beings than they are. It's something in their culture, something ruthless. They're highly civilized, full members of the League and so on, but it's all that the rest of the planets can do to restrain their expansionism. By hook or by crook, they want to take over the leadership." He brightened. "Oh, well, we're only going to play ball with them."
"Only?"
cried Putsy, aghast.
"What's so only about it? Man, this is for the sector pennant. This ain't no Bush League braggle. This is a crucial series."
Alex shrugged. "All right, so it is." But he could sympathize with his charges. The Hokas had come far and fast in a mere 10 years. It would mean a lot to them to win sector championship. The Galactic Series necessarily operated under some rather special rules. In a civilization embracing thousands of stars and still expanding, 1 year just wasn't enough to settle a tournament. The series had been going on for more than 2 centuries now. On the planets, local teams contended in the sub-series for regional championships, regions fought it out for continental victories, and continents settled the planetary supremacy. Then there were whole systems and series between systems, all going on simultaneously. Alex's brain reeled at the thought. Extrapolating present expansion of the League frontiers, sociologists estimated that the playoff for the galactic pennant would occur in about 500 years. It looked very much as if the Toka Teddies might be in the running then. In 1 short decade, their energy and enthusiasm had made them ready to play Saren for the sector pennant. The sector embraced a good 1,000 stars, but Toka had bypassed most of these by defeating previously established multistellar champions.
"If we lose," said Putsy gloomily, "back to the bush leagues for another 10-20 years, and maybe we'll never get a chance at the big game."
He cheered up.
Who's worrying? Casey ain't been struck out yet, and Lefty got a curve pitch that's out of this universe."
Alex pressed a button and spoke into the annunciator. "Send the gentle being in, Ella." He rose politely. After all, Ush Karuza, manager of the Saren Snakes, was a sort of ambassador. The monster squished in. He stood well over 2 meters high, on long, clawed legs. Half a dozen ropey tentacles, ending in strong, boneless fingers, circled his darkly gleaming body under the ridged, blubbery-faced head. Bulging eyes regarded Alex with a cold, speculative stare, but he bowed courteously enough. "Your servant, sir," he murmured in tolerably good English. "Welcome, Mr. Karuza," said Alex. "May I introduce Putsy Ballswatter, the manager of the Teddies. Won't you sit down?" Putsy rose, and the 2 beings nodded distantly at each other. Ush Karuza sniffed and unfolded a trapeze-like arrangement he was carrying. When he had draped himself over this, he lay waiting. "Well," said Alex, swinging into the little speech he had prepared, "I'm sure you 2 will get along famously." Putsy, who had been staring at Ush Karuza, muttered something to himself. "Did you say something, Putsy?" asked Alex.
"Nuts,"
said Putsy.
"Hiss,"
hissed the Serenian. "Well, as I was saying," continued Alex hurriedly, "you'll get along famously as you ready yourselves for the big contest." Putsy seemed on the verge of speaking again. "In your separate training camps," went on Alex loudly, "at good distances from each other. Under the rules, a team playing off its own world had to have a month's training on the other planet to accustom itself to the new conditions. There was also a handicapping system so complicated that no human brain could master it. Alex knew what the trouble was this time. It was something he had kept carefully to himself since first learning that the Teddies were to play the Snakes. The fact was that the Serenians bore a slight but unfortunate resemblance to the Sleazy, the reptile race which had been the Hoka's chief rival for control of Toka from time immemorial till men arrived to help out, and the fur on the little manager's neck had risen visibly at the mere sight of his opposite number. What was worse, Ush Karuza seemed to be experiencing a like reaction toward Putsy. Even as Alex watched, the tentacled monster produced a small bottle which he opened and wafted gently before his nose like a disdainful dandy of the Louis XV period on Earth. For a second Alex merely blinked, and then a whiff from the bottle reached his own nostrils. He gagged. Putsy's sensitive nose was wrinkling too. Ush Karuza came as close to smirking as a being with fangs in its mouth could. "Ah, merely a little Butyl-mercaptan, sirs," he hissed. "Our atmosphere contains a similar compound. It is necessary to our metabolism, quite harmless to man and Hoka." Said Alex brightly. Out of the corner of his eye he saw Putsy grind out his dead cigar in the ashtray and dig another one twice the size out of his baggy uniform shirt. He fired it up. butyl mercaptan sallied forth to meet and mingle with blue, noisome clouds of smoke. "Ah, so," mumbled Karuza furiously, and began to waft his bottle more energetically. Puff, 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 went Putsy. Gentle beings, please," wheezed Alex, taking the heavy paperweight away from Putsy. Venomously hissing, Karuza was uncorking a second bottle while Putsy crammed more cigars into his mouth. Things were off to a fine start. Alexander Jones came staggering home to his official residence that night in a mood to be comforted by his beautiful blonde wife, Tani. But the house was empty, she having taken the children for a few days to the Hoka Bermuda for its annual sack by pirates, a notable social event on Toka, and dinner was served by the admirable Crichton with his usual nerve-wracking ostentation. It was only afterward, sitting alone in the study with a scotch and soda, that Alex's ganglia stopped vibrating. The study was a comfortable book-lined room with a cheerful fire, and when he had slipped into a dressing-gown and placed himself before the desk, Alex realized that privacy was just what he needed. He pressed the door lock button, opened a secret drawer, and got out a sheaf of papers. Let not the finger of scorn be pointed at Alexander Jones. The most amiable, conscientious, thoroughly normal young men still have their hidden vices. Perhaps these outlets are what keep them on their orbits, and surely Alex had more troubles than most who shoulder the Earthman's burden. What the universe needs is more candor, more tolerance and understanding of human weakness. The truth is that Alexander Jones was a poet. Like most creative artists, he was frustrated by the paradoxes of public taste. As a solar guardsman, he had achieved immortality by his poetic gifts. It was he who had originated the limerick about the spaceman and girl in free fall, as well as the ballad of the transparent spacesuits, and these shall live forever. Yet they were merely the sparks of his careless youth, and he now winced to recall them. His spirit was with the Avantist revival. His idols had never been known outside of a select clique. Rimbaud, Baudelaire, Cummings, Eliot, Cogswell. From time to time the interstellar mails carried manuscripts signed J. Alexander to the offices of Microcosm, the minuscule magazine. So far they had also carried the manuscripts back, but a shoulderer of the Earthman's burden is not easily discouraged. Alex took a long drink, placed stylus to paper, and began writing. The circumambient snake surrounds the palpitating, tarry fever dream of uncertain distortions, and Siva screams and mutters unheard vacillations. Now, then, perhaps later, it is hot today. The Vizio set interrupted him with a buzz. He swore and pressed the accept button. The features of a rather woozy-looking Hoka appeared on the screen.
"Hiya, Bosh," said the apparition.
"Putsy," cried Alex, "you're drunk."
"I am not,"
Putsy replied indignantly, momentarily reeling out of screen range.
"Sober as a judge,"
he said, reappearing.
"Couple of liters ish all I had. Wouldn't make a pup drunk. It's this here stuff Karuza smokes when he's celebrating. These Serenians don't drink, they just smokes the stuff. Makes me kind of lightheaded, smelling it."
Putsy went over backwards. Climbing back into view, he said with heavy gravity,
"I called you up to tell you something. You said be nice to Karuza, didn't you?"
"Yes," said Alex, a dreadful premonition seizing him.
"That's what I thought you said. Well, listen, like you said, we went out for a little drink. Had a little talk, like you said we should. We got to talking shop, see? And I told him about those uranium mine rights. Right away, he wanted to bet me some salt mines on Sarin against him, so I did."
"You did?" yelped Alex.
"Sure I did. Signed the papers and all. Didn't you say be nice to him? But listen."
Putsy beckoned mysteriously, and Alex leaned forward, shaking. Putsy went on in a whisper.
"Here's the thing. Not only has I made him happy, but we got us some salt mines."
"How come?" moaned Alex.
"Because,"
said Putsy strongly, driving his point home with a stubby finger jabbed into the screen before him.
"Because he don't know it yet, but the Teddies is gonna win."
"Is that so?" barked Alex.
"Sure, and you know why?"
Alex shook his head numbly. "No, why?"
"Because," said Putsy triumphantly, "the Snakes is gonna lose."
He beamed.
"Just thought you'd like to know, Bosh. So long."
"Hey!" screamed Alex. "Come back here!" He was too late. The screen was blank. "Oh, no," he gasped. "Not this!" For a wild instant his only thought was of quotation at the waterfront. It had been shaping up so nicely. Wouldn't he ever get a chance to write something really significant? Then he settled back to realities and wished he hadn't. Tottering to his office the next morning after a sleepless night, he took an athitrine tablet and called the mission library to send up volume GAK to GAR of Basic Interstellar Law. When he received it, he turned to the section on gambling between things from different planets. He had to find out if the bet Putsy had made with Karuzak could be legally collected or not. The legislation in question turned out to be full of such witty statements as, "The above shall apply in all cases covered by Smith versus Xputui, except in such cases as are covered by sections 91 through 123 inclusive." Each of these with its own quota of exceptions and references. After 2 hours he was still no closer to an answer. He sighed, sent Ella out for more coffee, and was just settling down to a fresh assault on the problem when there was a sort of swirl in the air before him, and a semi-humanoid specimen with an enormous bald head topping a spindly little body materialized in his visitor's chair. "Greetings, youth," boomed the newcomer. "My visualization of the cosmic all implies that you are surprised. Do not be so. Be advised that I am Nikor of Rishana, who is to umpire the forthcoming contest between Toka and Saren." Alex recovered from his astonishment. The Rishanans, the most intellectual race in the known galaxy, were almost legends. They could be lured from their home only by a problem impossible for lesser races to solve. Such was any game governed by the 27 huge volumes of the Interstellar Baseball Association rules. As a result, Rishanans invariably officiated in the series as umpires. Otherwise, they ignored the rest of the galaxy and were ignored by it. Undoubtedly, they had a lot on the ball. For instance, whatever tiny machine or inborn psionic ability permitted them to project themselves through space at will. But since nobody really misses the brains he doesn't have, the rest of the League had never fallen prey to any sort of inferiority complex. Indeed, most beings felt rather sorry for the poor dwarfs. Since the Rishanans felt rather sorry for the poor morons, everybody was happy. Inspiration came to Alex. "May I ask you a question, sir?" he begged. "Of course you may ask a question," snapped Nikor. "Any ego may ask a question. What you really wish to know is whether I will answer the question." He paused and looked uncertain. "Or have you already asked me the question? Time is a variable, you know." "No, I didn't know," said Alex politely. "Yes, indeed," thundered the voice of that incredible ancient being, "as determined by Sunrak's hypothesis. But come, youth, the question." "Oh, yes." Alex pointed to the law book. "I'm having a little trouble with a small point here. Just a theoretical question, you know, sir. If a Hoka bet a Serenian some token land and lost, could the Serenian collect?" "Certainly," snapped Nikor. "That is, he would collect by respective substitute." "I beg your pardon?" "You need not apologize for inferior mentality. In effect, the Hokas, being wards of the League, would be protected, but as plenipotentiary and responsible individual, you would have to pay the winner an equivalent amount." "What?" cried Alex as the assessed valuation of the uranium mines, a 14-digit figure, reeled before him. He heard the explanation through a blur. The extreme libertarians who had drawn up the League Constitution had protected ordinary citizens right and left, but deliberately placed high officials on a limb. In this case, a judgment in equity would send him to the Serenian salt mines for, in view of the new longevity techniques, about 50 years, turning his wages over to Ushkaruza. The working conditions were not too bad unless one happened to have a distaste for the odor of the mercaptans. Well, enough of this pleasant but unprofitable chit-chat, youth, finished Nikor. Let us be off to the ball game.
What game? Asked Alex weakly. The pennant game isn't for another month.
Tut, tut, reproved Nikor. Don't interrupt. I am, of course, both forgiving and gracious. Perhaps you think an intellectual like myself has no sense of humor. So many beings fall into the misapprehension. Certainly I have a sense of humor. Of course it is more subtle than yours, and naturally I am not amused by the crude horseplay of lesser intelligences. In fact, went on Nikor, his brow darkening, that is the main trouble with beings of small development. They do not take the cosmic all seriously enough. No dignity, youth, no dignity.
But wait a minute, broke in Alex.
Don't interrupt. As an intelligence of the quaternary class, you cannot possibly make an interruption of sufficient importance to interfere with a statement emanating from an intelligence of my class. As I was saying, dignity. Dignity, that is what is so painfully lacking in the younger races.
A thundercloud gathered on his face.
When I think of the presumption of those few rash individuals who have dared to question my decisions upon the baseball field, but I am sure your charges will be guilty of no such indiscretion.
Alex rocked in his chair. If there was any sport the Hokas loved with a pure and undying love, it was umpire baiting.
As for your quaint belief that this is not the day of the game, continued Nikor, I could hardly expect you to know. You irresponsible children never know. When I was your age, I used to have to get up every morning and figure time as a variable to 14 decimal places before I could start my day's calculations. We didn't have sun racks in those days to help us. The trouble with you present youths is that you have it too easy. Surely you do not think I would put myself in the ridiculous position of having to realign myself for 30 days in the future. Naturally, I devoted only 1.8% of my reasoning power to this business of establishing my spatio-temporal coordinates, but it is inconceivable that I should fail. No, rest assured that this is the day of the game.
Alex pointed a mute finger at the chronopiece on the wall. Nikor whirled and stared at it.
What?
He roared with a volume that shook the office.
Am I to be given the lie by a mechanical? Am I to be outfaced by a planet? Am I to be maladjusted by a cosmic integral of the square root of -1 over log tangent x theta r squared over n dx from 0 to infinity? Blast sunrack! Damn the misplaced decimal point. Time is not a variable.
And with an explosion that rocked the room, he vanished. Now, it seemed, everything depended on the Teddies winning the game. Alex visited the Hoka ballpark and tried to make Putsy institute more rigorous training. The Hokan idea of practice was to let Casey swat a few wild ones while the basemen and fielders sat down puffing cigars, tilting jugs to their lips and chatting lightly of this and that. To Alex's protests that the Snakes were bound to get some hits when they came up to bat, Putsy reported that Lefty would fan them, or, failing that, fielders with the speed of the professor would easily tag them out. Alex gave up. He made an excuse to drop in on the Serenian training camp. The visitors were good, no denying that. Their main advantage was their terrific tentacle spread, handy for nabbing flying balls. And when the pitcher was winding up, you couldn't see what kind of pitch was coming among all those arms, or even what arm it was coming from. But they lacked the Hoka swiftness and hitting power. Alex, who had spent long hours under a hypno-teacher cramming himself with baseball lore, decided that one set of advantages just about offset the other so that there would be no handicapping. Ushkaruza looked positively gloating under his superficial good manners, and Alex began to get suspicious. Considering the ambitions of Saren, there was probably more at stake than the pennant and a bet. Returning to his office, the man consulted the service roster and found that a Serenian was now at the top of the list of those waiting for ambassadorial vacancies, and, if Toka's plenipotentiary were removed, would probably get the job. Since Saren was fairly close to the Tokan sun while Earth was far away, it wouldn't take long for the new chief to gain complete control of the planet for his people without attracting too much attention at headquarters. And a plenipotentiary sent to the salt mines would naturally not retain his position. Alex looked hollowly into space.
He didn't even have Tani to comfort him. She had messaged an intention to stay on a while in Bermuda, and he had agreed, not wishing to torment her with worry that might turn out to be needless. His carefully guided planet was headed for tyrannous foreign rule. He was headed for the same. Microcosm had just returned Greeks en brochette. There is an old saying that the optimist declares this is the best of all possible worlds. The pessimist is afraid he's right. Alex agreed. The big day dawned bright and clear and hot. Since early morning, a colorful throng of Hokas had been flocking into the ballpark. They had come not only from Mixumaxu and its neighboring city-states, but reflected the varied impact of human culture on their entire planet. A booted and spurred cowboy sat next to a top-hatted Victorian gentleman. A knight in armor clanked past a tubby space patrolman. A sashed character with a skull and crossbones on his cocked hat grumbled saltily, "Scupper my mizzenmast," as he tripped on his cutlass. One part of the stands was reserved for Serenian spectators, a silent and impassive mass of tentacles. As Alex walked across the field to his official seat in the Hoka dugout, he scowled. The substitutes were all present and accounted for. But where was the regular team? "Hot dogs, popcorn, soda pop," bawled a vendor in the stands above. "Get your pop here, folks. Can't kill the umpire without a pop bottle." Alex's worried eyes traveled across the dusty ground to the center of the infield. Nikor of Rishana was already there, leaning on the bookcase containing the 27 volumes of rules. There was a grim look on his face which might have been caused by thoughts of Sonrak, and a slightly withdrawn expression in his eyes as he mentally scanned the field from all necessary points of view. This psionic ability had enabled the number of umpires to be reduced to 1, even as the easy exhaustion of some races had forced changes in the rules governing substitutions. "Where's our team?" muttered Alex. "They're late already." The buzz from the bleachers became a chant. "We want the Teddies! We want the Teddies! We want the Teddies!" Then there was a ragged cheer as the famous 9 came into sight, not from the locker room, but from the main gate. Even at that distance, Alex saw how they staggered. Leading the way was Ushkaruza, looking smug and supporting Putsy, who was singing something about somebody called Adeline. Alex broke into a cold sweat. Putsy lurched up to him while the rest of the team was calling cheery greetings to their friends in the stands and forcing autographed balls on them. "Hiya!" burbled the Hoka manager, collapsing into Alex's arms. "I gotta tell you something. We got these Serenians all wrong. Good old Ush, all right. You know what he's done? He took us all out this morning and stood us to the biggest dinner in town. All the steak and French fries we could eat. Whoops!" He lost his grip and sat down suddenly. "Think I'll take a little nap." His beady eyes closed. Alex glared at the snake manager. "Is this your idea of fair play?" he asked. "Drugging our team? Umpire!" Nikor flickered in midair and appeared beside them. "What is it, youth?" "This," Alex pointed shakily at Ushkaruza, "this gentle being took our men out and drugged them with that stuff he smokes." "My dear sir," protested the monster, "it is merely a mild stimulant that we Sarenians smoke for pleasure. I am not accountable if it affects our little friends." Alex opened his mouth indignantly. "Down, youth!" snapped Nikor. "There is nothing in the rules covering pre-game festivities." He returned to midfield. Another Serenian pushed forward a great wheeled tank. "Ice cream," announced Ushkaruza grandly. "Help yourselves, my friends." As the Hokas threw themselves on it with besotted cries of glee, he pulled a book out of his pouch and gave it to the professor. "And for you," he added, "a brand-new biography of Tyrus Cobb, specially prepared by the Sarenian State Department." "Oh, boy!" The small bespectacled Hoka sat down and began reading it at once. Ushkaruza oozed off with every appearance of satisfaction. Alex buried his face in his hands. Nikor of Rishana spoke into his wrist microphone, and his voice boomed over the park. "Come, youths! My visualization demands that you now play ball." The spectators cheered. The band, somewhat confused, broke into Auld Lang Syne. The Toka Teddies wobbled out onto the field. Putsy sat up and muttered something about not feeling so good. The Snakes, as visitors, were first up to bat. Their star hitter, Shimpur Sumis, wrapped his tentacles around his club and waved it gleefully. Lefty, the Teddy pitcher, found his way to the mound and began turning around to get his position. He kept on turning. "Play ball, youth," thundered the umpire. Shimpur Sumis yawned. It seemed to infuriate Lefty. He sent his ball spinning in faster than Alex could follow, either because he wasn't quite himself or because he hadn't allowed for the greater reach of Serenian tentacles. Shimpur Sumis connected with a solid hit. The ball smacked into left field. The monster dropped his bat and galumphed toward first base. "Grab it, Professor!" screamed Alex. The intellectual outfielder was too immersed in his new book to notice. The ball shot past him. His fans howled, "Wake up, you bum! Grab that ball!" Shimpur Sumis rounded second. A hoka near Alex, clad in doublet and hose and feathered cap, leaped up, fitted an arrow to his longbow, and let fly. The professor yelled as it pinked him, glared around, saw the ball, and loped after it. By a miracle, he got it back to the catcher just as Sumis went by third. The Serenian retreated, grinning smugly. The next one stepped up to bat. Lefty sent a whizzer past him. The ball smacked into the catcher's mitt. "Ball one!" cried Nikor. "What do you mean, ball one?" squeaked Lefty, spinning around in a rage. "That was a strike if I ever seen one." "A strike," said Nikor, glowering, "must pass between waist and shoulders." "Yeah, but he ain't got any waist or any shoulders," protested Lefty. Yes, so I see." Nikor pulled one of the fat volumes out of the bookcase beside him and consulted it. Then he took forth a transit and sighted on the batter. The crowd rumbled impatiently. "The equivalent median line," said Nikor at last, "yields the incontrovertible result that the missile so injudiciously aimed was indeed ball one." Alex shuddered. Putsy turned green under his fur. The next ball met a hard, swinging bat. Again it zoomed by the immersed professor. Again the archer fired. This time the professor was ready. He plucked the arrow out of the air as it neared him and continued reading. Both Serenians loped home. Their rooters set up a football-style cheer. "Hiss, hiss, hiss, who is better than this? Squirmy worm, destiny's germ, team." The next Serenian went out on a pop fly just behind third. The one after that made it to first. But Lefty, even when pitching on hope and instinct, was not a hurler to be despised. The fifth Serenian up to bat barely got a piece of the ball, and both he and the Snake on base were put out in a wobbly double play. The Teddies came to bat. They were uniformly ineffective, with the single exception of Mighty Casey, who, as Putsy was too sick to tell him not to, tried to fulfill a long-standing ambition to lay down a bunt, but only succeeded in bunting the ball over the left field fence. Score 1 run for the Teddies. The next 4 innings were a rout. The regular Teddy team got even sicker and had to be taken out, and against the substitutes, the Serenians made blissful scores. At the end of the first half of the 5th inning, the board read 7-1 in favor of the Snakes. By the second half of the 5th, the original team members were weak but recovered and ready to take the field again with blood in their eyes. Casey was first up, and with a valiant return to his usual nonchalance, he put his hands in his pockets and sauntered toward the plate, a toothpick in his mouth and scorn in his eye. He whipped into his batting stance just as the Serenian pitcher let go. There was a blur, a crack, and he was strolling off along the baseline, nodding graciously to his fans. But for him it had been a poor and a weak hit. The Serenian left fielder reached forth an interminable tentacle and nabbed it as it came smoking along the ground. He whirled and shot it back toward first base. Casey saw it coming and broke into a panting run. He thundered into first together with the ball. "Out!" said Nikor, appearing at the bag. "Out!" screamed Casey, skidding to a stop and coming back. "I was in there ahead of the ball with enough time for a nap." "I say out," ruled Nikor. "Do not dispute with a superbrain. Time? Don't mention that word time to me." "Why, you blind, bloody, concrete-skulled superbrain!" Pop bottles began to fly from the stands, bursting to fragments in the air as the small robot-controlled anti-aircraft guns mounted on the right field fence went into action. Nikor ignored the bombardment and settled the discussion by flickering back into position behind the pitcher's mound. The game continued. The Teddies were still a little weak and uncertain. The Hoka following Casey was caught out at shortstop, and the next Hoka sent a high fly into right field, where it was easily taken for the putout. The Snakes came up to bat in the first half of the sixth inning. Lefty, turned white-hot with determination, retired the opposing side without gain by 3 straight strikeouts. The Hokas took over at the plate, and the first 6 men up scored 2 men and loaded the bases. The score stood at 7-3, with Casey yet to bat, and the Snakes called time out. "What is the occasion, youth?" demanded Nikor of Ushkaroza. The Serenian smirked. "I find I must invoke one of the handicapping rules, sir," he answered. "Article 43, Section 3, Paragraph 22b. In effect, it is that a certain gas is necessary to our players' metabolism, it being a mercaptan completely non-toxic in small doses. As you know, we may simply release it without slowing the game down by wearing masks and handicapping the Hokas." "There are psychosomatic effects," objected Nikor. "I refer to the nauseous stench involved." "I do not believe the rules say anything about such side issues," answered Karoza smugly. Nikor went back to the books. At last he nodded. "I fear you are right," he agreed sadly. "But in the name of sportsmanship—" Ushkaroza turned purple with rage and swelled up alarmingly. "Sir, how dare you?" he hissed. "Article 232, Amendment number 556, Paragraph 3a, explicitly states that Serenians are incapable of the concept of sportsmanship and specifically exempts them from observing it." "Oh." Nikor looked crestfallen. He checked. "True," he said bitterly. Alex felt ill already. This looked like the end. A great generator was wheeled into an upwind position on the field. It began to fume. Alex caught a whiff and felt his stomach rise in revolt. There could only be a few parts per million in the air, but it was enough. "Oof," groaned Putsy beside him. "Let me out of here." "You stay," said Alex desperately, grabbing him. Play up, and play the game." Nikor turned a delicate green. "My visualization of the cosmic all suggests I am going to be sick," he muttered. Putsy opened a box of cigars and passed them around to his team.
"This may help you for a little while," he said. "Now get in there and fight."
Tears rose in his eyes.
"Me aged grandmother is sitting at home, boys, old and sick, laying there amongst her roses and lavender, waiting for you to bring home the pennant. It'll kill the sweet old lady if you lose." "Ah, shut up," said his grandmother, leaning out of her place in the stands beside him and stuffing her knitting in his mouth. Alex fumed away on his own cigarette, trying to drown the smell that curled around him. There must be some way to escape those salt mines. With the mercaptan turning his stomach upside down on top of the effects of the drug, Casey still batted in the man on third on a sacrifice fly. The Hoka following him struck out. Retired, the Teddies lurched out onto the field and took another pasting. The score climbed against them. 6 Sarin runs in the 7th, 7 in the 8th, with the brief 1-2-3 interlude of the Teddies at bat hardly noticeable in the Snakes' slugging festival. When the Hokas came up again in the bottom of the 8th, they were trailing 20-4. Alex chewed his fingernails. There must be an answer to this. There must be some counter-irritant, something that would get the Hokas back to the careless energy and childlike enthusiasm which served them so well. Counter-agents. The idea flared in his head. He snatched at the water boy's arm. "Bring us something to drink," he commanded. The little Ursinoid sped away to return with a slopping bucket which Alex knew very well did not contain water. "Time out!" he yelled. "The Hokas request time out." "What for, youth?" asked Nikor faintly. "They need alcohol to protect themselves against the effects of the Serenian gas. It's okay by the rule books, I'm sure." Nikor brightened a little. "It does protect?" he inquired. "Then, youth, you may bring me some, too." Ushkaroza jittered about in a rage while the Teddies gathered weakly around the bucket and dipped their noses into it. Even by Hoka standards, they got it down fast. Nikor scowled at his complimentary beaker, sipped, winced, and gasped. "This is necessary to them?" he cried. "I have seen halogen breathers, I have seen energy eaters, I have seen drinkers of molten lead, but here is the race.
that shall rule the sevagram." Casey lifted his dripping black snout. "Erp," he said.
Got a toothpick?
"Play ball," hollered Ushkarazah wrathfully. The babe waved casually at Putsy. "We'll get 'em," he said confidently, and connected with the first pitch for a clean single to left. The professor came up with his book in one hand, stuck it under his arm just long enough to belt one out of the park, and walked home with his nose back in his book.
"Geez," he muttered reverently, "that Cobb could sure play ball."
Lefty stepped up to bat with an evil gleam in his eye. The Serenian star pitcher launched a ferocious fastball across the middle. Lefty let it go by. "Oof," said the catcher. "Strike one," said Nikor. Time out to replace one catcher. There was no second strike. Lefty bounced the next pitch off the right field wall for a stand-up triple. Casey sneered and sauntered out to the plate. Grabbing the end of the Serenian catcher's fourth tentacle, he began picking his teeth with it. "Halt! Stop! Foul!" shrieked Karuzah. "He bit my player." Some of Alex's hard-won baseball knowledge came to his aid. "Article 41, Section 5, Paragraph 17A. Players may take such nourishment as is required during the game," he flung back. "But not off my players," wailed Karuzah. Nikor weaved over to his books and consulted them. "I am afraid I can find nothing forbidding cannibalism," he announced. "It must never have occurred to the commission." The pitcher let fly. Casey set his bat end on the plate and jumped up to balance on top of it. "Strike one," called Nikor. "Nope," said Casey owlishly.
"You mean ball one, ump. The ball went under my waist, under my feet, in fact."
"So it did," agreed Nikor imperturbably. "Ball one."
"The rules," sputtered Ushkarazah.
"Nothing in the rules against balancing on top of a bat, youth." Nikor scratched his bulging head. "I do believe the commission will have to call a special meeting after this game." The Serenian pitcher wound up again. As the ball zoomed toward him, Casey swung the mightiest swing in Toka's history. The Snake's second baseman saw the ball screaming at him and dropped to the ground in terror. A bolder monster in the outfield raised his glove and caught it, or perhaps one should say it caught him. He was lifted off the ground, described a beautiful arc, and landed 3 meters away. The ball went merrily on to cave in a section of the fence beyond. Casey, who had been spinning on one heel, unable to stop, came to a halt and staggered around the bases. He had plenty of time because the Serenians had to dig the ball out from between 2 planks. Time out while the Snakes replaced one unconscious outfielder and one second baseman with a bad case of the shakes. The rest of the Hokas followed the example of their star players and sailed twice completely through their lineup before being retired with a score of 19 to the Snakes' 20 at the end of the 8th. The crowd, including Alex, was going wild. Shimpur Sumis came up to bat with a haughty look, suggesting that he alone could settle the matter. Lefty, who was higher than a kite, threw him a ball so fast that it exploded on being struck. Nikor consulted his library for the rule on exploding balls, found none, and called it a strike, though he admitted that his visualization was not very complete today. Sumis' abused tentacles could not handle the bat well enough to keep him from being struck out. Ushkarazah snarled and went over to the mercaptan generator and opened the valves wide. A thick, nearly visible stream of vapor rolled across the field to envelop the Hoka pitcher. Lefty was too drunk to care. He sent off his famous curve. Then he gaped at it. So did the Snake batter. So did Alex. No, the ball couldn't possibly be where it was. It landed in the catcher's mitt. "Strike one," announced Nikor. The next pitch was even more unbelievable than the last. It defied all known natural laws and went in a sine curve. "Strike two." The batter flailed wildly the third time. Alex distinctly saw the club go through the ball, but nothing happened. "Strike three," said Nikor. "Youth, you are now external to the n-dimensional sociological hypersphere."
"Huh?"
asked Putsy.
"He means you're out," translated Alex happily.
"Foul!" bawled Ushkarazah. "They're using black magic." "There is nothing in the rules against magic," said Nikor.
"I just throw a damn good curve, that's all," said Lefty belligerently.
The next Serenian fared no better. By that time, Alex had figured out the situation. The thick stream of mercaptan vapor has a refractive index appreciably different from air. he told Putsy. "No wonder it produces optical illusions. Hoist by their own petard." Putsy seemed dubious.
"If that means what I think it means," he said, "you shouldn't ought to say it in front of me grandmother."
The Teddies came to their turn at bat. It was the last half of the ninth inning. The score stood at 19-20, with the Teddies trailing. The batting order at that moment stood first the Babe, then the Professor, then Lefty, and then Casey. The Serenians looked grim, but the Hokas in the stands, who had resorted to their potent pocket flasks while the team was getting its liquor from the water boy, were wildly jubilant. As the Babe picked up his bat and strode to the plate, they began a cheer which finally died away to an awful silence as the whole crowd held its breath. The Serenian pitcher was clearly determined to let no hits be gotten off him. He wound up and let fly. From the stands rose a mighty groan of horror, interspersed with shrill hoots of glee from the Serenian section. For the stream of mercaptan vapor was still flowing past the pitcher, and all 3 balls weaved a daisy chain past the plate. "Strike 3!" cried Nikor. "Out!" Sadly, the Babe came back. The stands were in an uproar. It looked as if open battle might break out between the Hoka and Serenian fans. Alex cringed on his bench. The Professor went up to the plate. The ball looped crazily by him. "Strike 1!" A long moan of agony went up from the Hokas. "Strike 2!" The Professor braced himself. There was a wild, almost berserk gleam in his spectacles. The Serenian pitcher writhed and twirled his tentacles with contemptuous confidence. The ball shot forward. The Professor threw himself and his bat to meet it. There was a tiny tick. The ball popped out of the vapor fog and trickled along the ground toward third base. There were only a few seconds of time before it was caught, but that was all the Professor's famous legs needed. There was a whiz, a blur, an explosion of dust, and the Hoka was safe at first. The tying run was on, and there were 2 outs left to bring it home. Lefty took his time selecting his bat. He swung it heavily a few times to test the balance, and then slowly stalked up to the plate. The pitcher wound up. He threw. The stands groaned. "Strike 1!" thundered Nikor in a voice of doom.
"Casey," said Putsy in a shaking tone, "get ready, boy." Alex turned to look at the Teddy's mainstay. To his surprise, the little batter seemed cool and calm. "Relax, Putsy," Casey said. "It's in the bag. All I gotta do is knock us both home." "But those pitches," said Putsy. "Listen," said Casey with some heat. "Listen, you don't think I ever bothers to watch the pitcher, do you? All I pays attention to is the ball from the time it gets to about 2 meters away from me. And the ball gotta be straight then, or the ump calls it a foul. They can't fool me none." Slowly, hope began to dawn on Putsy's furry face. He was even smiling as Nikor called strike 3, and Lefty returned glumly from the plate. Casey got to his feet and began his customary nonchalant stroll toward the batter's box. At first the crowd merely gaped at him in astonishment, but then, drawing courage from his apparent confidence, they raised a swelling cheer that rocked the stands. He doffed his cap and kissed his hand to the fans, waved, rubbed his hands in the dirt, and took up his stance. Alex saw through a vision blurred by tenseness that the Serenian pitcher was already losing heart at sight of this overweening opponent. "Time out!" screamed Ushkaruza. For a moment the park was held in agonized silence. Then a mounting growl, like that of a Boomerangian sea bear disturbed at its meal, commenced and grew. "For what reason, youth?" asked Nikor. "Article 36, Section 8, Paragraph 19K, said Ushkaruza defiantly. "Any manager may encourage his team by verbal means." Nikor checked. "Correct," he said. "You may proceed." There was a scurry from the Serenian dugout, and a public address system was wheeled onto the field, and its microphone set up before a small tape player. As the stands waited silently to see what this new move might portend, Ushkaruza switched it on. There was a hissing noise as the machine warmed up. At the plate, Casey smiled indulgently. And then the hissing stopped, and a voice boomed over the park. It was not a Serenian voice, but human, and the first words it uttered wiped the smile from Casey's lips and fell on the field like the hand of doom. For the voice was reciting, and the first words were, "It looked extremely rocky for the Mudville 9 that day. The score stood 2-4 with but 1 inning left to play.
So when Cooney died at second,
"Oh, no," wailed Putsy. "It's it."
"What's it?" choked Alex.
"That poem. Casey at the bat. Oh, look at poor Casey now."
The manager pointed a trembling finger at the Teddy's last hope, who was shaking with unbearable sobs as he stood at the plate. "I protest!" screamed Alex, leaping from the bench and running wildly out to where Nikor stood. "You have no right to protest," snapped the umpire. "You are merely a spectator."
"Then I protest,"
roared Putsy, skidding to a halt beside Alex.
"Turn that thing off."
At the plate, Casey was melting down in his own tears as the tape swung back into the 5th stanza. Then from the gladdened multitude went up a joyous yell. It rumbled in the mountain tops, it rattled in the dell. It struck upon the hillside and rebounded on the flat, for Casey, mighty Casey, was advancing to the bat. Casey was flat on the ground now, making feeble, pawing motions as if he would dig his grave where he lay, crawl in, and die. "Your protest is out of order," said Nikor. Ushkaroza oozed oily sympathy. "I am afraid your batter is not feeling well," he murmured. And when the writhing pitcher ground his ball into his hip, defiance gleamed in Casey's eye, a sneer curled Casey's lip. Abandoning the umpire, Putsy ran to his collapsed star and tried to lift him from the ground.
"For cripe's sake, Casey," he pleaded, "stand up. Just get us one little hit, that's all I ask."
"I can't," choked Casey. "My heart ain't in it no more. They trusted me in Mudville, and I let 'em down." The stillness over the park was broken only by his sobs and the inexorable recorded voice. Close by the sturdy batsman, the ball unheeded sped. "That ain't my style," said Casey. "Strike one," the umpire said. Like a drowning man, Alex saw his whole life parade by him. Tanny, the children, Earth, Toka. It was not what he wanted. He wanted some way out of his inferno. No other batter had a chance. The Teddies were too demoralized. But what to do? What to do? Surely he, Alexander Jones, had some means of helping, some talent. He gnawed trembling fingers as the poem told its way to its dreadful conclusion. And now the air is shattered with the force of Casey's blow. Damn all poets! Oh, somewhere in this favored land the sun is shining bright. The band is playing somewhere, and somewhere hearts are light. And somewhere men are laughing, and somewhere children shout. But there is no joy in Mudville. Poetry. Mighty Casey has struck out. "Yipe," said Alex. There was one other outstanding ability which Ensign Alexander Jones had shown in the Guard besides hitting the dirt, and that was that, when the occasion arose, he was very quick off the mark when there was something to be run to or from. Therefore, just as some weeks earlier the promptitude with which he nose-dived would have pleased his superiors, so now they would have joyed to see the speed with which he covered the distance between the umpire's post and the public address system. Even the professor would have been pushed to match his velocity, and the way he stiff-armed the lone Serenian guarding the recorder was a privilege to observe. He snatched up the microphone and panted into it. "Go on, boss," yelled Putsy, unsure what his adored plenipotentiary intended, but ready to back him up. "Pant, pant, pant," boomed Alex over the field. Ushkaroza ran to stop him. "Hold, youth," ordered Nikor. "He has a right to use the machine." "Pant, pant," panted Alex, and began to improvise. "But hold," pant. "What strikes the umpire? What causes him to glare? With fiery pant, pant. Look, an awful eye upon the pitcher there. And Casey takes the catcher by the collar with his hand. He hails him to the pant umpire, and together there they stand." Beside the plate, the Hoka Casey lifted his head in wonder, and wiping the tears from his eyes, stared open-mouthed at Alex. The human had had his dark suspicions about the way Lefty was struck out last time. No chance to prove that, but he could weave it into his revenge. "I bid you look," cried Casey. "I bid you search him well. For such as these, our fine fair game, they soon would sound its knell." Alex hesitated, looking a trifle confused.
"That's my plenipotentiary who said that," cried Putsy's grandmother, and thus heartened he proceeded.
The umpire checks them over, and the villains' faces fall, when out from each one's pocket he pulls forth a hidden ball. "Oh, shame!" cries out the Mudville crowd. The echoes answer, "Shame! That such a dirty, low-down trick should blight our Casey's name. The pitcher only faked his throw, the catcher faked his catch. The cowards knew that such as they were never Casey's match." "You untentacled mammal!" raged Ushkaruza. "You slimeless conformation of boned flesh!" Alex had long ago discovered that mankind rarely reacts to insults couched in non-human terms. It did not offend him at all to be told that he was slimeless. The Teddy's Casey was sitting up by the plate now and beaming. Alex took a deep breath and went on. "Now take your places once again, once more," the umpire cried. "And your next pitches will be fair, or else I'll have your hide. Now take your places once again, to places one and all." And as soon as they were ready, the umpire cried, "Play ball!" The Hoka Casey was up on his feet and clutching his bat. His eyes were riveted on Alex, and as the last two stanzas came out, his little form hunched and twisted through the motions Alex described. And now the pitcher takes his stance, his face is black and grim, and he starts his furious wind-up with a fearful verve and vim. And now he rocks back on his heel, and now he lets it fly. The ball comes sizzling forward, watched by Casey's steely eye. For Casey does not tremble, mighty Casey does not balk. Though it's clear the ball is high and wide, and they aim to make him walk. He steps forward in the batter's box, his bat's a lambent flame. Crack! Smash! The ball flies o'er the fence, and Casey wins the game. The stands were going crazy. Hokas of all shapes, sizes, and descriptions came pouring down from their seats to mob and congratulate Casey, of course. Who else was responsible for the Mudville win? To Hokan taste, it was almost an anticlimax after the glorious victory of the fictional Casey when the factual one playfully tapped a home run over the left field fence and won the sector pennant. In spite of custom, Alexander Jones did not preside over the wild festivities that night. He felt he deserved a quiet evening at home, alone, with a tall drink and quotation at the waterfront. Tani would be coming back soon, and much as he longed to see her, he knew she would give him no chance to produce something really significant, some poem reflecting the realities of life. Inning 1, Saren 2, Toka 1. Inning 2, Saren 1, Toka 0. Inning 3, Saren 1, Toka 0. Inning 4, Saren 1, Toka 0. Inning 5, Saren 2, Toka 0. Inning 6, Saren 0, Toka 3. Inning 7, Saren 6, Toka 0. Inning 8, Saren 7, Toka 15. Inning 9, Saren 0, Toka 2. Total score, Saren 20, Toka 21.